patrons and subscribers and first-time visitors. My name's Random Rob. Welcome back to the new show. Today we're going to talk about one of the most misunderstood stories in science fiction literature. Stanislaw Lem's Solaris. And what I'm going to do is present you with 3 facts you need to know about the 2002 film by Steven Soderbergh, the 1972 film by Andrei Tarkovsky, and the novel by Stanislaw Lem. So we're going to work backwards in time. So, Solaris 2002. This was originally going to be a James Cameron film. Cameron had secured the rights to Solaris and had been working on production for the film for several years, but because of other conflicts was not able to shoot it. And director Steven Soderbergh stepped into the role as he was finishing up the movie Ocean's 11, which also explains why George Clooney ended up in the film. Soderbergh imagined his film as a remake of the 1972 Tarkovsky film, rather than an adaptation of the novel. So here are my 3 main things you need to know about the 2002 film. Number 1, the butt controversy. Apparently George Clooney's naked ass caused controversy for the release of this film. And the story goes that because of the butt, the MPAA gave the film an R rating, and that Soderbergh had to plead and fight with them to get it reduced to a PG-13, which I don't think I believe. I think the truth of this story is that the film was going to get a PG-13 rating, and they added the butt to get an R. The reason being is that this sequence was shot during reshoots after the rest of the film had been completed, and George Clooney stated in an interview around the time of the film's release that this scene had been added to spice the film up. With a PG-13 rating, you were sure to draw a teenage crowd. Producers looking at the final cut of this film would certainly have known that it would have bored a teenage audience with its slow pace and lack of intense action sequences. But an R rating might bring in an adult audience. For whatever the reason, this additional scene created buzz around the opening of the film. Whether it was worth it, I don't really know. The second thing you need to know about the 2002 film, it focuses exclusively on the romance. Forgot my coffee. Okay. Soderbergh wanted the film to be a story about romantic redemption, which, as we'll discuss shortly, really has nothing to do with what the story of Solaris is actually about. And the problem with that is that it reduces all of the more interesting philosophical and scientific themes of the story to background elements that are barely touched on, and in my opinion, really misses the mark and doesn't reach a satisfying conclusion. Number 3, this film has an amazing, underappreciated soundtrack. The music for the film was done by composer Cliff Martinez. It combines sampled tones and uses rhythmic bell and chime melodies, and creates a film soundtrack quite unlike any other film score I think I've ever heard, and I recommend looking it up. It's just gorgeous stuff. So, the 1972 film was made for the Soviet state film company Mosfilm by Andrei Tarkovsky. It was for its time an epic film production. Tarkovsky corresponded with Stanislaw Lem for months while he was working on the screenplay, and it is still considered a masterpiece of Soviet science fiction even today. So, my 3 things you need to know about this film. Number 1, it is a political reply to 2001's message. The message of 2001 is that the urge to explore drives human evolution. That these explorations change our consciousness and where we're going. By comparison, Tarkovsky's film practically presents a Luddite message. That is, if there is no way for us to derive any real meaning from contact with a higher alien consciousness, then what's the point? Maybe we should just stay home. Number 2, The introductory sequence of this film feels like a disclaimer. One can certainly get the feeling watching Tarkovsky's Solaris that the Soviet government might have been a little nervous releasing a film about futuristic Soviet astronauts confronting a problem that drives them all crazy. So in the long introductory sequence, there's much explanation given to what went wrong, why did this happen, what a tragedy this was. Basically building you up for about a half an hour for the fact that the film you're about to watch is a downer. The Soviet Union has always had a complicated relationship with psychiatric disorders, and often being mentally ill was a label applied to you if you were espousing anti-Soviet beliefs. So I'm pretty sure pressure was applied to Tarkovsky not to present things that looked like symptoms of mental illness in any kind of way that would throw shade on the Communist Party. The third thing you need to know about Solaris 1972. It's the first used future film. The amazing space station sets that were built by Mikhail Romadin have this futuristic yet dilapidated look, which is appropriate to the story. And although later films like Star Wars and Alien would be credited for popularizing this look, Solaris is really the first film to do it. There's an anecdote that Akira Kurosawa came to the set during shooting and thought that the sets were really cool. So finally, we're at Stanislaw Lem's 1961 novel. My 3 things you need to know. Number 1. Solaris is an existential fable about the inadequacies of communication and human imagination when confronted by a totally non-human consciousness. The entirety of the story is dedicated to this subject, whether depicted between Chris Kelvin being unable to find peace with the various replicas of his dead wife Hari, or the endless arguments between the other scientists about the nature of what Solaris is and their inability to resolve the problem, or the various technical journals that Chris reads throughout the book, which also offer many questions but no answers. Number 2, the ironic conclusion that the book draws that didn't end up in either film. At the end of the novel Solaris, Chris Kelvin ventures out onto the Solarian Sea in a boat in an attempt to come to grips with what's going on. And it finally occurs to him that the reason that no one has been able to understand the planet's attempts at communication with the humans is that the planet itself might be an infant, and that its generation of copies of people from the scientists' memories may amount to nothing more than meaningless baby talk. And it touches on the idea that planets are living things, and perhaps even stars are living things, with their own alien consciousness. It's a wonderfully eloquent idea. I don't know why it did not end up in the films. I really can't understand why anyone would do an adaptation of this work and not include this particular point. And the third thing you need to know is that Stanislaw Lem did not like either film adaptation. He felt that both films focused on the human relationships to the exclusion of the ideas he was actually trying to get across. And Tarkovsky would say in an interview later on that he never thought that Lem was really interested in cinematic art and simply expected directors to reproduce his work without having any kind of artistic apprehensions about it. I love the Lem novel. It was one of those formative reading experiences when I was in my early 20s. It's a novel that projects a lot of sadness and pathos about the situation these scientists find themselves in. I think the Tarkovsky movie is an incredible film. I love the electronic score by Eduard Artemyev. It gives you the sense when you're watching it of the Solarian ocean being this threatening presence just outside the windows, pushing in on these scientists. The film creates this wonderful feeling of claustrophobia with this nightmarish void being right outside. The Soderbergh film completely misses that altogether. The station is in orbit, and they never even go down to the planet. And the consciousness is supposed to be represented by this aurora borealis that we see out of the windows. And it's just too artificial and clean looking to create the same kind of feeling of brooding menace that the Tarkovsky film creates. I don't even know how you make a film of Solaris and not have the living ocean. I mean, it's like literally the central visual metaphor of the book. Forget it. I do think the Soderbergh film looks really cool. It just doesn't feel like Solaris to me. The film does introduce an interesting wild card in the character Snow, who turns out to be a copy who has killed his original. That added a psychological horror element that I thought was fascinating if they could have expanded it more. At the time, the actor Jeremy Davies had been doing a performance piece where he was playing Charles Manson. And in the Solaris film, he does Snow as Manson. Doesn't really have anything to do with Solaris, but it's still a really interesting performance and an interesting idea, even if the film itself doesn't really work. So what do you think about Solaris? Let me know in the comments below. And if you liked what you heard, press the like button and subscribe, and consider becoming a patron of the new show. I could use your help. Alright, this is Random Rob for the new show. I'll see you next time. The new show is made possible by generous support from viewers like Tony, Luz, Arnell, Skipnick, Christopher, Eric, and B. Thank you so much for your support.